Marcus Kane gripped the controls of his transport ship as warning lights bathed the cockpit in angry red. The supply run to Kepler Station should have been routine: medical supplies, protein rations, and water recyclers for the Outer Rim settlements. Instead, he found himself fighting to keep his ship intact after a cascade failure in the hyperdrive had yanked him out of faster-than-light travel in the middle of nowhere. "Come on, old girl," he muttered, coaxing the aging vessel toward what his scanners identified as a small moon with a breathable atmosphere. The ship groaned in protest, hull plating buckling under the stress of atmospheric entry. Marcus had been flying these routes for 8 years, ever since the divorce had left him with nothing but his pilot's license and a desperate need to get as far from Earth as possible. The crash landing was more controlled than catastrophic, but barely. The ship carved a deep furrow through purple-tinted grass before coming to rest against a cluster of crystalline formations that jutted from the ground like frozen lightning. Marcus took inventory: alive, ship intact enough to provide shelter, emergency supplies for maybe 2 weeks. The distress beacon was transmitting, but out here in the frontier, rescue could take months. He was checking the external sensors when movement caught his eye. A figure emerged from behind one of the larger crystal formations, moving with predatory grace despite what appeared to be a pronounced limp. Marcus reached for his sidearm, then stopped. The being approaching his ship was humanoid but clearly not human, skin that seemed to shift between deep blue and violet in the strange light, silver hair that moved as if touched by an unfelt breeze, and eyes that glowed with an inner phosphorescence. More importantly, she was injured. Dark fluid, probably blood, stained her torn clothing along her left side, and her limp was growing more pronounced with each step. Marcus made a decision that would have seemed insane to his younger self but felt perfectly natural now. He opened the airlock. "Hey," he called out, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "You're hurt. I have medical supplies." The alien woman stopped, tilting her head as if trying to understand his words. When she spoke, her voice carried a musical quality that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "You speak the old tongue." The words were accented but clear, suggesting some kind of universal translator or prior contact with humans. "English, yeah. Are you hurt?" "I'm Marcus, by the way. Marcus Kane." He gestured to himself, then to her injury. "That looks serious." She studied him for a long moment, those luminous eyes seeming to weigh his intentions. Finally, she nodded. "I am Zara Veltar. And yes, I am hurt." She stumbled slightly, and Marcus moved without thinking, catching her arm to steady her. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, not painful, but startling in its intensity. Her skin felt warm despite its alien appearance, and there was something else, a subtle energy that seemed to resonate with his own biorhythms. Zara pulled back quickly, but not before he caught a flicker of surprise in her expression. "Inside," Marcus said, nodding toward his ship. "I've got a med kit, food, clean water. We can figure out the rest after I patch you up." Zara hesitated, glancing over her shoulder at the crystal formations. "They hunt me," she said quietly. "My presence here endangers you." "Who's hunting you?" Marcus asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Refugees were common in the Outer Rim, people fleeing wars, persecution, or worse. He'd transported his share of them, no questions asked. "My own people," Zara admitted, her voice carrying a weight of old pain. "I am, how do you say, fugitive. I refused to accept the bonding they chose for me, so I fled. But among the Zenthari, such defiance is punishable by death." Marcus felt a familiar anger rise in his chest, the same rage that had driven him to punch his ex-wife's lawyer during the divorce proceedings. The idea of anyone being hunted for refusing a forced marriage brought back memories of his own trapped feeling, though admittedly his circumstances had been far less dire. "Well, they'll have to go through me first," he said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "Come on, let's get you patched up." The ship's medical bay was cramped but functional. As Marcus cleaned and dressed Zara's wound, a deep gash that looked like it had been made by some kind of energy weapon, he found himself stealing glances at her face. Her features were delicate yet strong, with high cheekbones and a determined jaw that spoke of inner strength. The phosphorescent quality of her eyes seemed to pulse gently, like a slow heartbeat. "You are not what I expected," Zara said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "What do you mean?" Marcus secured the bandage and stepped back, trying to ignore how the loss of contact left him feeling oddly bereft. "Humans have a reputation among my people," she explained, settling more comfortably on the medical table. "We are told you are aggressive, unpredictable. Dangerous to those who are not like you." Marcus snorted. "Well, we're definitely unpredictable. As for dangerous," he shrugged. "I suppose that depends on your perspective. I've known humans who would sell their own mothers for the right price, and others who would die before betraying a stranger's trust." "And which are you, Marcus Kane?" Zara's question was asked lightly, but he could sense the weight behind it. "I guess you'll have to find out," he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "But I can tell you this, I've never been in the habit of abandoning people in need. Especially not people running from forced marriages." Something shifted in Zara's expression, a walls coming down look that made his breath catch. "You speak as one who understands such things." "More than I'd like to," Marcus admitted. "My ex-wife, let's just say she had very specific ideas about what our marriage should be, and they didn't leave much room for what I wanted." "Yet you were free to leave," Zara pointed out. "Among the Zenthari, the bonding ceremony creates literal connections between minds. To refuse is to be cast out, marked as untouchable. To flee," she touched her wounded side gingerly, "is to be hunted." "That's barbaric," Marcus said, the anger creeping back into his voice. "It is tradition," Zara replied simply. "And tradition is not easily changed, even when it causes suffering." Marcus studied her face, noting the way her eyes dimmed slightly when she spoke of her people. "Do you miss it?" "Your home, I mean." "I miss what it could have been," she said carefully. "I miss the parts of it that were beautiful, the crystal gardens, the singing towers, the way the double moons would paint everything silver during the harmony season. But I do not miss the cage they built around my life." "Cages are funny things," Marcus mused, checking his instruments absently. "Sometimes you don't realize you're in one until someone shows you the door. And sometimes," Zara said softly, "the door appears when you least expect it." Their eyes met across the small space, and Marcus felt that strange resonance again, stronger this time. Whatever was happening between them, it was moving fast, too fast for comfort, but not fast enough to stop. He cleared his throat, trying to break the spell. "You should rest," he said. "That wound needs time to heal, and you've lost more blood than you probably realize." "And you?" Zara asked. "When did you last rest, Marcus Kane? You have the look of a man who has been running for a long time." The observation hit closer to home than he cared to admit. "I rest when I need to. Right now, I need to figure out how to get us off this moon before whoever's hunting you tracks us down." "They will not find us quickly," Zara said, settling back on the medical table. "This moon is shielded by the crystal formations, they interfere with most scanning equipment. It is why I chose it as a refuge." "How long have you been here?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. 3 weeks, perhaps 4. Time moves strangely when you are alone with only your thoughts for company. She closed her eyes, and Marcus noticed how the phosphorescent glow dimmed as she relaxed. "I had begun to think I would die here, alone. Then your ship fell from the sky like a gift from the void." "Some gift," Marcus muttered. "Broken hyperdrive, limited supplies, and a pilot who specializes in making bad decisions. The universe rarely provides perfect solutions," Zara replied, opening her eyes to look at him again. "But sometimes it provides exactly what we need, when we need it most." Marcus felt something shift in his chest at her words, a loosening of a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. For the first time in years, he found himself genuinely curious about another person's story, genuinely invested in their well-being beyond the simple decency of helping someone in need. "Get some rest," he said again, but more gently this time. "Tomorrow we'll figure out our next move." As Zara's breathing evened out in sleep, Marcus found himself watching the play of light across her alien features, wondering what it would be like to see the crystal gardens and singing towers she described. More importantly, he wondered what it would be like to see them with her. Outside, the strange moon's night began to fall, and in the distance, crystal formations began to hum with an otherworldly music that seemed to echo the rhythm of his heart. Nina cross-pressed her palm against the biometric scanner, waiting for the heavy blast doors to recognize her identity. The underground medical facility on Terminus 7 wasn't much to look at, converted mining tunnels reinforced with composite steel, but it served its purpose. Out here in the neutral zone, far from the prying eyes of various governments and military organizations, she could practice medicine the way she believed it should be practiced, without borders, without prejudice, without questions about who deserved treatment and who didn't. The scanner beeped its approval, and Nina stepped into the main treatment bay, her medical bag slung over her shoulder. She'd been called in for an emergency case, though her contact had been frustratingly vague about the details. All she knew was that someone needed help, and they were willing to pay handsomely for her discretion. Dr. Cross. A nervous-looking human in maintenance coveralls approached her. "I'm Hendrix. Thank you for coming so quickly." "Just Nina," she corrected, as she always did. The title felt too formal for the kind of work she did these days. "Where's the patient?" "Isolation Bay 3, Hendrix replied, leading her deeper into the facility. "Fair warning, he's not exactly standard issue, if you know what I mean." Nina had treated her share of alien species over the years. The galaxy was full of different physiologies, and medicine was medicine, regardless of how many hearts your patient had or what color their blood was. "What species are we dealing with?" "Valerian," Hendrix said, and Nina stopped walking. Valerian? She'd heard of them, of course. The warrior race from the Sigma Draconis system had a reputation that preceded them throughout the galaxy. 7 feet tall, built like living tanks, with a culture that valued strength and honor above all else. They were also notoriously isolationist, rarely venturing beyond their own star system. "What's a Valerian doing all the way out here?" "That's not my department," Hendrix replied with a shrug. "I just maintain the equipment. But he's been unconscious for 3 days, and our automated systems keep flagging critical alerts." Nina's professional instincts kicked in, overriding her curiosity. "What kind of injuries are we looking at?" "Severe trauma to the torso, what looks like energy weapon burns, and..." Hendrix paused. "Well, you'll see." The isolation bay was larger than the standard treatment rooms, which made sense given the size of Valerian physiology. Nina's breath caught as she got her first look at the patient. Even unconscious and injured, he was magnificent. His skin was a deep bronze color with darker patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living tattoos. His hair was black as space, falling past his shoulders, and his features were sharp and angular in a way that spoke of both intelligence and barely contained power. But it was the extent of his injuries that made Nina's heart clench. Someone had worked him over systematically, energy burns covered his arms and chest, and there were what looked like restraint marks around his wrists. This wasn't the result of a fair fight or honorable combat. This was torture. "How long since he's been conscious?" Nina asked, already moving to check his vital signs. "Not since we found him," Hendrix replied. "Whoever dumped him here must have figured we'd either patch him up or let him die quietly." Nina's hands moved efficiently over the patient's body, cataloging injuries and checking responses. His breathing was shallow but steady, and his heart rate was elevated but stable. The burns were severe but not life-threatening, and the restraint marks were mostly superficial. What concerned her more was the complete lack of response to external stimuli. "His neural activity is suppressed," she murmured, studying the readings on her portable scanner. "These aren't just physical injuries. Someone's been messing with his mind." "Can you help him?" Hendrix asked. Nina was already unpacking her supplies. I can try. But I'm going to need complete privacy and absolutely no interruptions. Whatever happened to him, he's going to need time to heal, and Valorians don't trust easily under the best of circumstances. You got it, Hendrik said, heading for the door. I'll make sure you have everything you need. Alone with her patient, Nina began the delicate work of treating his injuries. The physical damage was extensive but manageable. She'd seen worse in the field hospitals during the Centauri conflict. It was the neural suppression that worried her. Valorians were known for their mental fortitude, their ability to endure pain and hardship that would break other species. For someone to have broken through those defenses suggested either incredible cruelty or sophisticated technology. As she worked, Nina found herself studying his face. Even in unconsciousness, there was something compelling about him, a strength that injury couldn't diminish, a dignity that torture couldn't steal. She'd always been drawn to healing, to the moment when pain gave way to relief, when hopelessness transformed into possibility. But this felt different, more personal somehow. Who are you? She whispered, cleaning the worst of the burns with practiced efficiency. And who did this to you? It was nearly 6 hours later when he finally stirred. Nina had been monitoring his neural activity, watching as the suppression gradually lifted and normal brain function returned. His eyes opened slowly, revealing irises of deep amber that seemed to hold flecks of gold. For a moment, he simply stared at the ceiling, breathing steadily. Then his gaze found hers, and Nina felt an unexpected jolt of connection. There was intelligence in those eyes, and pain, but also something else, a recognition that made no sense given that they'd never met. You are not Valerian, he said, his voice rough from disuse but surprisingly gentle. No, Nina replied, setting aside her instruments. I'm human. My name is Nina Cross. I'm a medic. You're safe. He tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. Nina moved to help him, her hand steadying his shoulders. The contact sent warmth racing through her body, and she noticed his eyes widen slightly, as if he'd felt it too. How long? He asked. 3 days since you were brought here, Nina replied. But your injuries suggest you were held for longer than that. Can you tell me your name? He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Cale Thorne, he said finally. And you risked much to heal me. It's what I do, Nina said simply. Help people who need it. Even enemies of your species. Cale's voice carried a note of surprise. Are you an enemy of my species? Nina asked, meeting his gaze directly. I was told I was, Cale replied slowly. By those who held me. They said humans were treacherous, that they could not be trusted. They said many things. Nina felt anger rise in her chest at the implication. And what do you believe? Cale's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on his shoulder. His skin was warm and surprisingly soft despite the obvious strength beneath. I believe that actions speak louder than words. And your actions speak of compassion, not treachery. The simple statement hit Nina harder than it should have. She'd spent years treating patients, saving lives, and making a difference wherever she could. But it had been a long time since someone had acknowledged the cost of that choice, the loneliness, the constant moving, the walls she built around her heart to protect herself from getting too attached. You should rest, she said, trying to regain her professional composure. Your body needs time to heal. As does yours, Cale said quietly. You carry pain as well. I can sense it. Nina pulled back, unsettled by his perceptiveness. I'm fine. My job is to worry about you, not the other way around. Perhaps, Cale said, settling back against the pillows. But among my people, healing is a sacred bond. The one who saves a life becomes responsible for it, but the one whose life is saved becomes responsible for the healer's well-being in return. That's not how it works here, Nina said, though she found the idea strangely appealing. No. Cale's amber eyes held hers. Then how does it work? Nina realized she didn't have a good answer. Her entire adult life had been dedicated to healing others, but she'd never really considered what she might need in return. I help people get better, and then I move on to the next case. And what of Nina Cross? Cale asked. Who helps her when she needs healing? The question struck at the heart of everything she'd been avoiding for years. I don't need healing. I'm fine. Are you? Cale shifted slightly, his gaze never leaving her face. You work alone, in hidden places, treating patients who cannot be taken to conventional medical facilities. You carry supplies for a dozen different species, suggesting you never know what you might encounter. And you have the eyes of someone who has seen too much suffering and taken too much of it into herself. Nina felt her defenses crumbling under his gentle but relentless observation. How could you possibly know any of that? Because I recognize a fellow exile when I see one, Cale said simply. We are both far from home, both carrying burdens that others cannot understand. The difference is that I chose my exile. You, I think, had it chosen for you. The accuracy of his assessment took her breath away. The Centauri conflict, she said quietly. I was a field surgeon with the relief forces. We were supposed to be neutral, helping anyone who needed it regardless of which side they were on. But when the ceasefire broke down, they made you choose sides, Cale finished. They made me choose between my principles and my citizenship, Nina corrected. I chose my principles. The government didn't appreciate that decision. So you came here, to the neutral zone, where you could practice medicine as you believed it should be practiced. Something like that. Nina found herself relaxing despite her better judgment. There was something about Cale's presence that made her want to share things she'd kept locked away for years. What about you? What brought a Valerian warrior to the middle of nowhere? Cale's expression darkened. I questioned orders. Among my people, that is, discouraged. What kind of orders? The kind that would have required me to harm innocents in the name of honor, Cale said, his voice carrying old pain. My commanders felt that my conscience was a weakness that needed to be corrected. Nina felt sick at the implication. The neural suppression. They were trying to break you. To remake me, Cale corrected. To turn me into the perfect soldier who would never question, never hesitate, never feel doubt about the righteousness of his cause. But you escaped. I was rescued, Cale said. By someone who believed that conscience was not a weakness but a strength. Though I fear they may have paid a heavy price for that belief. Nina saw the guilt in his eyes and understood it intimately. You can't save everyone, she said softly. Trust me, I've tried. As have I, Cale replied. But that does not make the failures easier to bear. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Nina found herself acutely aware of Cale's presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his body, the way his amber eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed defenses. Why did you really come here? Cale asked eventually. To this specific place, to treat me specifically? They said someone needed help, Nina replied. That's all I needed to know. And you always respond to such calls? When I can. Nina hesitated, then added, I suppose I'm looking for something. What? I don't know, she admitted. A sense of purpose, maybe. Or just, connection. I've spent so long moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to form real relationships. Sometimes I wonder if I'm helping people or just running from my own problems. Cale reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, his fingers intertwined with hers. Perhaps both, he said. And perhaps that is not a bad thing. Sometimes we must run from what we were to become what we are meant to be. And what are you meant to be? Nina asked. I am still discovering that, Cale replied. But I know it involves protecting those who cannot protect themselves, and honoring the bonds that matter most. Even if those bonds are with someone from a different species? Someone your people might consider an enemy? Kale's grip on her hand tightened. Especially then. True honor is not about following rules blindly. It is about choosing to do right even when it is difficult, even when it costs us everything we thought we wanted. Nina felt something shift in her chest, a walls coming down sensation that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I should check your bandages, she said, though she made no move to let go of his hand. In a moment, Kale said. First, tell me something. What? When you look at me, what do you see? The question was simple, but Nina sensed the weight behind it. I see someone who's been hurt, she said slowly. Someone who's lost things that mattered to him. But I also see strength, and kindness, and a kind of integrity that's rare in this galaxy. And when I look at you, Kale said, I see someone who has dedicated her life to healing others, often at great personal cost. I see compassion and skill and a beauty that goes far deeper than mere physical appearance. Nina felt heat rise in her cheeks. Kale. I know we are different species, he said gently. I know there are complications, cultural barriers, practical concerns. But I also know that what I feel when I look at you is unlike anything I have experienced before. What do you feel? Nina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hope, Kale replied. For the first time in longer than I care to remember, I feel hope. Nina realized she was holding her breath. I should be professional about this. You're my patient. Yes, Kale agreed. But I am also a being capable of making my own choices. And I choose to tell you that you have given me something far more valuable than medical treatment. What's that? A reason to believe that there is still good in this galaxy, Kale said. That there are still people worth fighting for, worth protecting. Worth loving. The last word hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and promise. Nina felt her heart racing, her carefully constructed professional walls crumbling completely. This is crazy, she whispered. Perhaps, Kale said, bringing their joined hands to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. But I have found that the best things in life often are. Outside the isolation bay, the facility hummed with quiet activity, but in their small corner of the universe, Nina and Kale had found something neither of them had been looking for, a connection that transcended species, circumstance, and the painful pasts that had brought them together. As Nina finally moved to check his bandages, she found herself thinking not about the next patient, the next emergency, the next place she would need to run to. Instead, she found herself thinking about the possibility of staying, of building something with this wounded warrior who saw her not as a useful tool but as a person worthy of care and protection. For the first time in years, Nina Cross allowed herself to hope. James Mitchell rubbed his tired eyes and stared at the holographic display floating before him. The alien script seemed to dance and shift in the blue light, its meaning just beyond his grasp despite 3 weeks of intensive study. As the Galaxy Union's top linguistic specialist, he deciphered 17 different alien languages, but the Mindari communication protocols were proving to be his most challenging assignment yet. The space station's diplomatic quarters were quiet at this hour, most of the delegates having retired for the evening. James preferred working nights anyway, fewer interruptions, fewer well-meaning colleagues asking if he'd made progress on the impossible language that had stumped every other linguist in the Union. A soft chime indicated someone requesting entry to his workspace. James frowned, checking the time display. Nearly midnight station time. Enter, he called out, not bothering to look up from his work. The door whispered open, and James felt a peculiar tingling sensation at the base of his skull. He'd experienced something similar once before, during first contact with the Betazoids, but this was different, more subtle, like a melody heard from far away. You work late, James Mitchell. The voice was unlike anything he'd ever heard, layered with harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. James turned, and his breath caught. The being standing in his doorway was humanoid but unmistakably alien. Her skin had a faint luminescent quality, shifting between silver and pale blue in the artificial light. Her hair was white as starlight, flowing like liquid mercury, and her eyes were the deep violet of nebulae, holding depths that seemed to go on forever. "Your Mindari," he said, stating the obvious but unable to think of anything else to say. "I am Sarah Night Whisper," she replied, stepping into the room with fluid grace. "I have been sent to assist with the translation project." James felt his pulse quicken. "I wasn't told an actual Mindari would be joining the team. I thought your people preferred to maintain distance during negotiations." "We do," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from his workstation. "But the documents you are attempting to translate are sensitive. My people decided that direct assistance would be preferable to potential misunderstandings." "Sensitive how?" James asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The Mindari were telepathic, and their written language was rumored to contain emotional and psychic components that couldn't be captured by conventional translation methods. "They concern the formal bonding ceremonies of my people," Sarah explained. "The texts describe not just the words and rituals, but the mental and emotional connections that make the ceremonies meaningful. Without understanding these deeper layers, any translation would be incomplete." James leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "And you're willing to share that kind of intimate cultural information with an outsider?" "Not willingly," Sarah admitted, and James caught a flash of something, reluctance. Fear, in her violet eyes. "But the Galaxy Union has requested formal diplomatic relations with the Mindari Collective. Understanding our bonding practices is apparently crucial to establishing proper protocols." "Because your people mate for life," James said, remembering his briefing materials. "And because your telepathic abilities make the bonding process literal rather than metaphorical." "Yes." Sarah's voice carried a note of surprise. "You have done your research." "It's my job," James replied, though he found himself genuinely curious about her rather than just the language she represented. "But I have to ask, why you?" "From what I understand, discussing bonding ceremonies would be personal for your people." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the holographic display. "I am unbonded," she said finally. "Among my people, that makes me suitable for such discussions. One who has experienced the bonding would find it too painful to share such intimate details with an outsider." James heard the carefully controlled emotion in her voice and felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." "You did not pry," Sarah said, meeting his eyes again. "You asked a reasonable question. And I find your directness refreshing. My people communicate so much through mental connection that spoken words can seem unnecessarily blunt. But there is something honest about your approach." "Honest," James repeated. "That's one way to put it. My ex-wife used to say I was tactless." "Your ex-wife was incorrect," Sarah said with surprising certainty. "I can sense the consideration behind your words, the genuine desire to understand rather than simply to know." "That is not tactlessness." James felt that tingling sensation again, stronger this time. "You're reading my mind." "Not reading," Sarah corrected. "Sensing. Your thoughts remain private unless you choose to share them. But emotions, intentions, the deeper currents of feeling, these are harder to shield." "And what are you sensing from me right now?" James asked, genuinely curious. Sarah tilted her head, studying him with those impossible eyes. "Loneliness," she said softly. "Professional satisfaction but personal isolation. A mind that finds joy in solving puzzles but struggles with the messier complexities of relationships." The accuracy of her assessment was unsettling. "You're very perceptive." "It is not perception," Sarah replied. "It is what I am. What my people are. We cannot help but be aware of the emotional states of those around us. It is why we typically avoid extended contact with other species. Your thoughts and feelings are so intense." "Intense how?" "Chaotic. Contradictory. Beautiful and terrible and overwhelming all at once." Sarah's voice took on a wistful quality. Mindari emotions are more harmonious. We think and feel in patterns that complement each other. But humans. She shook her head. You feel everything so deeply, so completely. It is exhausting and exhilarating. James found himself leaning forward, drawn by her words. Is that why you're unbonded? Because you find other species interesting? Partly, Sarah admitted. But also because I have never encountered another Mindari whose mental patterns complement mine. The bonding process requires perfect synchronization of thoughts and emotions. Without it, the connection cannot form. That sounds lonely, James said quietly. It is, Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But it is also safer. A failed bonding attempt can damage the minds of both participants. It is better to remain alone than to risk such harm. James felt a sudden urge to reach out to her, to offer comfort somehow. Instead, he turned back to the holographic display. So, about these texts. What am I missing? Sarah moved her chair closer to his workstation, and James caught a faint scent like starlight on snow. The symbols you see are only part of the communication, she explained. Each character carries emotional resonance, psychic weight. When two bonded minds read these texts together, they experience not just the meaning but the feelings that created the meaning. Can you show me? James asked. I mean, obviously you can't create the full telepathic experience, but could you help me understand what I'm missing? Sarah hesitated. It would require contact. Not full mental connection, but enough of a link for you to sense the emotional layers. Is that dangerous? For you, no. For me. Sarah's expression was troubled. Extended contact with a non-Mindari mind can be overwhelming. Your thoughts' patterns are so different from ours. We don't have to, James said quickly. I don't want to put you at risk. But you need to understand the texts, Sarah pointed out. And I need to fulfill my assignment. Perhaps we can find a way to make it work. She reached out slowly, her fingers hovering just above his hand. May I? James nodded, and Sarah's fingertips touched his. The contact was electric, sending shivers up his arm and into his mind. Suddenly, the symbols on the holographic display weren't just marks, they were alive with meaning, rich with emotion and history. The bonding ceremony begins with the presentation of souls. Sarah's voice seemed to come from inside his head as well as his ears. Each partner reveals their deepest self to the other, holding nothing back. James could feel the weight of the ceremony, the profound vulnerability and trust it required. But more than that, he could feel Sarah's own longing, her deep desire for such connection despite her fear of rejection. It's beautiful, he whispered. It is, Sarah agreed, and James realized she was experiencing his wonder at the ceremony through their link. But also terrifying. To be so completely known by another. To be accepted despite being known, James added, understanding flooding through him. That's what makes it meaningful. Their mental connection deepened, and James felt Sarah's surprise at how easily their thoughts seemed to flow together. Where she had expected chaos, she found patterns that complemented her own. Where he had expected strangeness, he found a mind that seemed to understand his own need for order and meaning. This is unexpected, Sarah said, her voice carrying wonder. What is? The synchronization. Our mental patterns, they're not identical, but they're compatible. James felt his heart racing. Is that rare? Extremely, Sarah replied. Even among my own people, such compatibility is uncommon. Between species, it should be impossible. They sat in silence for a moment, their hands still touching, both afraid to break the connection. James could feel Sarah's fear warring with her growing attachment, her professional duty conflicting with her personal desires. What happens now? He asked. I don't know, Sarah admitted. This was not part of the plan. Plans change, James said softly. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we don't plan for. Among my people, bonding is not entered into lightly, Sarah said. It is permanent, irreversible. To bond with a non-Mindari would be unprecedented, James finished. But not necessarily wrong. Sarah's violet eyes met his, and James felt the full weight of her longing, her fear, her hope. You would be willing to consider such a thing? Knowing that it would change you, that you would never be quite human again? I've spent my entire career studying other cultures, other ways of thinking, James replied. Maybe it's time I experienced one from the inside. And I have spent my life alone rather than risk a bonding that might fail, Sarah said. But with you, I feel hope. For the first time, I feel like connection might be possible. James squeezed her hand gently. Then let's explore that possibility. Together. The bonding ceremony is complex, Sarah warned. It would require time, preparation, absolute trust. I'm a linguist, James said with a smile. I specialize in complex communication systems. And I've got all the time in the world. Sarah's answering smile was radiant. Then perhaps we should begin with the presentation of souls. Are you ready to be truly known, James Mitchell? By you? James brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I can't think of anything I want more. As they began the ancient ritual that would bind their minds and hearts together, James realized that sometimes the greatest discoveries weren't made in laboratories or libraries, they were made in the space between two souls reaching out to each other across the vast darkness of space. The translation project would be completed, the diplomatic protocols established, but what mattered most was the connection they had found in each other. In a universe full of different species, different cultures, different ways of thinking, they had discovered that love truly was the universal language. And as their minds touched for the first time in perfect synchronization, both James and Sarah knew that they had found something worth more than all the words in all the languages of the galaxy, they had found each other. Epilogue. 6 months later, James Mitchell stood before the Galaxy Union Council, presenting his completed translation of the Mindari bonding texts. Beside him, Sarah Nightwhisper, now Sarah Mitchell in human custom, radiated the quiet contentment of someone who had found their perfect match. The bonding ceremony, James explained to the assembled delegates, is not merely a legal or social contract. It is a fundamental joining of minds and hearts that creates something greater than the sum of its parts. He glanced at Sarah, feeling the warm touch of her mind against his. It is proof that love can bridge any gap, overcome any barrier, and transform any two beings into one unified whole. As the council voted to approve formal diplomatic relations with the Mindari collective, James and Sarah shared a private moment of connection, their bonded minds celebrating not just their professional success but their personal triumph. In finding each other, they had done more than solve a translation puzzle. They had proven that the greatest mysteries of the universe could be unlocked not through study or analysis, but through the simple act of opening one's heart to another soul. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but the greatest wonder of all was the love they had found in each other, a love that would last as long as the stars themselves burned in the endless night of space.